in 36th and good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
The latest GB News travel.
And good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems continue in Tyne and Wear on the A194M. The motorway remains blocked northbound from the Follingsby roundabout up to the Whitesmere Pool roundabout, the scene of a free vehicle collision. On Merseyside, south of St Helens at Sutton Leach, the A569 is closed on Marshall's Cross Road by collision, and the M1 in Hertfordshire is crawling towards London. The inside lane's closed from junction 6 to 5 near Watford at the scene of a collision. In southwest London, the Falcon Road at Battersea blocked northbound following a head-on collision between a bus and a car. And Greater Anglia trains are suspended if you're heading through Essex out of Whittam to Braintree, with delays of an hour and a half with some cancellations between Chelmsford and Colchester, all down to those overhead line problems at Chelmsford. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Well, 10 million pensioners will lose their winter fuel allowance. Is this a great folly from the Labour Party, or was it overdue and necessary? Big majority for the government on this, although over 50 Labour MPs did not support their own government. And today, the mass prisoner releases begin with extraordinary scenes outside HMP Wandsworth, with champagne being opened and spliffs being handed all round. I wonder how the victims of domestic abuse feel seeing some of these scenes. And on the riots, well, for years and years, it feels, well, only a few months, you've been told that I incited the riots, and yet, we actually get now, we get the Tsar, who is in charge of terrorism in this country, with support from a very, very senior member of the House of Lords, saying, actually, the government withheld information that the public deserved to hear. I wonder just how much Keir Starmer had to blame for what happened in Southport and elsewhere. But before all of that and much more, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. It's just gone 7 o'clock. These are your headlines. Millions of pensioners will lose winter fuel payments after the Conservative motion to stop Labour's plan to slash the payments was defeated.
8. The noes to the left, 348.
A total of 53 Labour MPs abstained on the vote, while Labour MP John Trickett was the only rebel. The Prime Minister's defended the cut, calling it a tough decision needed to tackle a £22 billion deficit. But critics, including some Labour MPs, warned it could force millions of pensioners to choose between heating and eating. Despite the backlash, the government insists the cuts are necessary to secure the foundations of the economy. Now, former Cabinet Minister Mel Stride has been knocked out of the Conservative leadership race after receiving just 16 votes.
Mel Stride is eliminated from the contest, and the following 4 candidates go.
The former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick finished top with 33 votes, with Kemi Badenoch second on 28, while James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat both got 21 votes each from Tory MPs. Meanwhile, the UK, along with France and Germany, have announced fresh sanctions on Iran for supplying Russia with ballistic missiles. Part of the sanctions will include restrictions on Iran's air ability to fly to the UK and parts of Europe. It comes amid US Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to the UK, where he confirmed Iran has sent short-range ballistic missiles to Russia and predicts they'll be used in Ukraine within weeks. Antony Blinken gave the warning after strategic talks with the Foreign Secretary in London aimed at boosting the special relationship between the two nations. Speaking alongside David Lammy, Mr Blinken described the development as a threat to all of Europe. Mr Lammy echoed his concerns, calling the missile supply a significant escalation, and announced a joint trip to Ukraine with Mr Blinken later this week. In other news, thousands of prisoners could be placed in taxpayer-funded hotels as more than 1,700 inmates walk free today in an effort to cut overcrowding in jails. The Justice Secretary says probation staff have been authorised to use budget hotels if needed after concerns were raised about reoffending because some inmates are unprepared and face homelessness. Shabana Mahmood insists the early release scheme is temporary, giving the government time to reform the prison system. And with just 8 weeks to go before the US election, Republican candidate Donald Trump and Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris are set to face off in their first and only debate tonight. Both candidates are neck and neck in key battleground states, but the debate could be critical for Harris, as polls suggest many voters still don't know much about her. Trump's team is urging him to focus on immigration and inflation, while Harris is expected to attack the former president's record on abortion and the Capitol riots. And you can watch all the action live overnight here on GB News, with America Decides Trump versus Harris starting at 2 a.m. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, the winter fuel allowance has gone for 10 million pensioners. It was a very big parliamentary majority of 120 for the government, although one Labour MP, John Trickett, did vote against his own party and about 52 abstained, but still a very big victory. We're told, of course, this is all about plugging the black hole of £22 billion that Labour say they found, although rather more cynically, I'd say the black hole's £2.7 trillion, which is the size of the national debt. Some of the response to this has been pretty extraordinary, and one of my constituents who's spoken out really strongly on this is Jim O'Dwyer. Now, I mentioned Jim because he's somebody that I met during the campaign, and he's 99 years old, and he did 31 missions in a Lancaster bomber as tail end Charlie in World War II. And the reason he won't get the winter fuel allowance is because he has a very, very small private pension that comes in. And Jim Dwyer is very clear about it. He says, look, this is disgusting. After all I've done for the country, why am I being treated this way? Now, of course, there are wealthy pensioners that were getting the winter fuel allowance, but quite why we couldn't pick up the idea that Lord Cameron pushed yesterday, that we just don't give the allowance to those paying 40p tax or more, I just don't know. I wonder, folks at home, is this Labour's great folly? Let me know what you think. Farage at gbnews.com. And the quote from my constituent, the 99-year-old, was, "We pay in all our lives and this small perk is cut. It is absolutely disgusting what this government is doing and the way they're treating us after all we've done for our country." And I bet you, over the course of the next few days, you'll see a lot more Jim O'Dwyers appearing in our tabloid newspapers. I'm fairly certain of it. I'm joined in the studio by Kwasi Kwarteng, former Conservative Member of Parliament and Chancellor, Joe Phillips, Paddy Ashdown's former press secretary, and many other things, campaigns, media. But I'm joined first down the line by Ivor Kaplan, former Labour Defence Minister, who joins me from Brighton. And it would be fair to say, Ivor, that there have been some Conservative voices questioning this over the years, but I understand you fully support what the government have done today.
Absolutely, Nigel. I think this was the right decision to make. I know it's an early decision in terms of where we are as a as a Commons, but obviously there's work to do up until you get to the budget. And so by dealing with this one and dealing with all the issues, I think that's right. Can I just help? I hope this is helping anyway, and just say one thing. I heard you just say about 52 Labour MPs, but what we do actually know is only 12 of those are actually people who voted or abstained without permission. The rest are not here for whatever government reason they may be, something which is not an unusual situation in any situation for the government. There are people abroad, there are people doing other things, but that's the numbers that I've got.
Well, OK, whether you're right or wrong, what really matters, Ivor, is not what the backbenchers think of what the front bench has done, it's what the country thinks. And, you know, I mentioned my 99-year-old constituent who did his tour as Tail End Charlie, and you see cases like that. Doesn't feel quite right, does it?
Well, I think the whole thing about the winter payment has always been something that has made it very difficult in some occasions. There have been moments right through since Gordon Brown, I think, first suggested this in the late 90s, that there were people who wanted to change things. And we've never actually got to it, even though I think deep down we all knew that the pensions were just not working properly for everyone. You know, and as you just said in your introduction, Nigel, you know, there were people who are on significant sums of money who were still taking their 300 quid. So there's always been this issue. You can go back over the last 15 years and you can find that sort of comment from people who have different views, but all really joined together on this matter.
OK, Ivor Kaplan, you could not be clearer. Thank you for coming on and making that point. Kwasi, I mean, of course, we know that it's ludicrous that wealthy pensioners should have been receiving this. I did think the Lord Cameron suggestion was quite clever.
So, look, this has been an issue that's been debated for years. And when I was in the Treasury, before that, people would always come up, the civil servants would always say, what about the winter fuel payment? And generally, chancellors and people in political life have taken a political decision and said, we can't harm the most vulnerable people in our society. Now, what Labour have done, and let's be frank about this, is they've made a political decision. They've come in, they've only been there, 2 months? And they've said we're going to do inflation-busting deals for unions.
Yep.
And we're going to essentially pay for that by taking away pensioner benefits. That wasn't forced upon them. That was a political decision
Is that because they think the pensioner population won't vote for them next time?
They will have made political and economic decisions. But what Rachel Reeves is doing is saying, OK, we're giving the unions more than inflation. Inflation's at 2%. They're giving them 8% a year in some cases for 3 years. And they're saying, in order to pay for this, we're going to take away winter fuel payment. Now, it's their prerogative to do that, but I think politically and morally, some people might say, this was the wrong choice.
It's a funny one, Joe, that Rachel Reeves herself has claimed £3,700 in heating allowances off the taxpayer for her second home. It's not a good look, is it?
No, it's not. And actually, all of this, as Ivor said, and you and Kwasi have said, it is utterly ridiculous that wealthy people, you know, are being paid this money and have been over the years. And the triple lock is much more important because it increases pensions. Just a couple of quick things. The pay awards that were given to public sector workers were recommended, as you very well know, by the independent pay review bodies. There are more pressing issues, actually, I think, but the government have handled this so badly. This has been running for weeks and weeks and weeks. She announced it as a total shock to everybody.
It was a shock.
A week before Ofgem announced the new cap on energy prices, 2 months, nearly 3 months before her budget, with no indication of what might be done, whether it's going to target council tax bans or whether it's to raise the personal... You know, there are loads and loads of things.
Here's the funny thing about it. Here's the funny thing about it. You know, as Kwasi, as Joe quite accurately says, it came as a bolt from the blue. The bit that surprised me, no impact assessment had been done.
No. So
I find that really surprising.
So they've done a political decision. I mean, look, I've been there. I've done budgets that have, surprised markets.
No question about it.
And there's a sense in which, I totally get where they're coming from. They want to come in, they want to get things done, in a dramatic way, and they're hoping that sometime, in the middle of the Parliament, everyone will have forgotten about it. The danger with this, and I remember the coalition government, when the Lib Dems voted for tuition fees.
I was thinking that,
They never recovered.
No,
they got 23% in the election. By the end of the year 2010, they were on 10%, I checked. And 5% of that was from the tuition fee.
Hence my audience question tonight. Is this Labour's folly?
So, time will tell. They're hoping that, in 2 years' time, people will have forgotten about this and there'll be other things that are
or
on the
even
agenda.
by next April when pensions go up, or if there is something announced in the budget in October. But if you're going to do something like this and you're going to make it a political statement about black holes and finances, surely it is more sensible to hit the wealthiest rather than a group of people, and every single newspaper, every single MP can wheel out somebody. They're not finding people going, well, actually, I don't need it, I'll die another case.
Well, you're looking at actually, sort of, in some constituencies, you're looking at 10,000 voters.
So the problem,
the impact. And are the Liberal Democrats likely to be beneficiaries of this?
I don't think so. I mean, today's vote was completely, unnecessary, and I think one should give credit to Keir Starmer for letting. They don't need it.
He had no choice, did he?
Well, he did. He could have just.
He could have waited. You see, the clever thing about it is that it would have been much riskier doing it in a budget.
Why?
Because actually you don't want rebels in a budget. This was an indicative vote. It wasn't really something that was binding. If the number of people objecting to a budget on a vote would be much more politically significant.
Yeah, exactly.
So in a way, he's taken the heat now. He's got the vote. He can say, look, my party are behind me. We've got a 120 majority, and he can move on. And actually, it makes it less likely that he'll do a leave.
Well, and also, I think, as Ivor said, the rebels, the abstainers, there's only a dozen of them.
You say that.
Well, I don't buy that. I'm sorry.
But the reality
I don't buy that.
Nigel is an MP and I've been an MP. What will happen? The whips will say, look, I know you're uncomfortable about this.
Don't come in.
Why don't you
maybe,
be scared?
Maybe they will.
And
they will
have those
aware.
conversations.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that.
But the point is, it is not a massive rebellion.
No, you're right. And actually, generally...
It is all puff and win.
In percentage terms, it's not a huge...
No. And also...
Whether it's 12 or 15.
And Nigel, you'll find this. At the beginning of the Parliament, the rebellions are quite small because people, they're newbies, they're getting the hang of it, they're trying to work out how things work. The middle of the Parliament is where, I think there'll be proper rebellions by that point.
Wouldn't surprise me. Well, we'll see. I have a feeling the impact of this might last in the minds of some people a little bit longer than my panel suspect. I could be wrong. In a moment, the first 2,000 prisoners were let out today. 1,700 of them were domestic abusers, some of them quite serious. In a moment, we'll show you scenes from outside HM Prison, Wandsworth. And I'll ask, how do the victims and families of victims feel looking at these scenes today?
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
With her novels Persuasion and Northanger Abbey both set in Bath, the city has taken to honouring their author each year with the Jane Austen Festival. Over 3,500 Austen fans flock to the city, many in their Regency finery and many coming from abroad. You can join the throng and follow the author along streets whose buildings look much the same as when she strolled past them over 200 years ago. Dating back to 2001, the festival is the world's largest and longest-running celebration of the Romance writer. Originally created by the Jane Austen Centre in Bath and running over the course of one weekend, 23 years on, it's grown into a 10-day festival with more than 80 events. And to tell us more, I'm delighted to be joined now by author and broadcaster Jenny Trent-Hughes. Jenny, let's have a look at you. You look absolutely splendid. Well, welcome to GB News. Tell me a little bit about what you're wearing.
I'm wearing, well, usually I have a character called the Queen of All Hearts, and I have a fantastic outfit designed by Bath Theatrical. I was on the way up to you this morning. I was so excited I was going to meet you finally, and because of the trains, I didn't get to come. So I had to run back to my boat. I live on a boat, which is why the background is a bit odd, and I'm in a Regency outfit.
Well, look, I'm absolutely delighted that you have put the outfit on for us, because also someone was bringing a dress to you and her train was cancelled as well. So dressing up is obviously a big part of it. Have you any idea how many people dress up in order to participate?
Quite a few thousand.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Well, some of your thoughts from home on my question, is this Labour's folly? Richard says, yes, Nigel, it is Labour's poll tax moment and the Lib Dems' uni fees moment. They will not survive 5 years. I tell you what, with the majority of that size, I think they probably will last 5 years, but hey. Valerie says, Nigel, I wonder if the Labour government thinks that if loads of pensioners succumb to cold, oh, don't, we will have fewer pensioners to pay for. No, I don't think even the darkest minds that might exist inside government would be thinking of that. Gosh, I'm being so generous today. Now, it's the beginning of the prison release scheme. 5,500 prisoners to be released between now and the end of October. After all, we have to make room for those who've been beastly on Facebook, don't we? Now, Charlie Peters, GB News' reporter, was down with a camera outside HM Prison Wandsworth this morning. Just have a look at some of these scenes.
Everyone's been happy today, I'm sure, coming out there, haven't they? There's been a lot of happy people faces in the house, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you're grateful to Labour and you're grateful to the...
100%, yeah. I'm Labour, vote Labour all my life.
Yeah.
Labour's the one.
Well, there you are. He's been let out early and he's now going to be Labour all his life. I'm not sure that's really what it was for, but there was a party atmosphere outside there. People gathered outside the prison before the releases, playing loud music and champagne corks popping. I mean, look, it's, everyone's gathered, exciting, there's music blasting out.
Well, not very many people.
Where did they get the champagne from?
No, there's a few. Well, you'll see that in a moment. Here we are. Champagne time.
It's like the Grand Prix.
Big celebrations. Yeah, you've got first prize in the race. Well done. And I can also tell you that prisoners that came out were being given, and we can't show this on the television, but were being given already lit spliffs. But that's all fine, and that's what we do.
Do you mean reefer cigarettes, as they used to call them in the old days, Nigel?
That have a funny smell, absolutely.
Yeah, very funny smell. A smell that's much more common these days than it ever was before. Joe, people serving up to 40% of their sentences, some as small as 20% of their sentences. Surely if they go to prison in the first place, they should stay there for a reasonable time.
Yes, they should, if there's space and capacity for them. But actually, as we were just saying in the break, and the previous government was already doing this. So there is nothing new in this that's happened. We've got the backlog of COVID, which is clogging up the court with an awful lot of cases and some very serious cases waiting to get to court, and that means some people are held on remand for much longer than they should be. We've You've got a prison estate, as they call it, which is absolutely creaking at the seams and is in appalling conditions. I mean, it's coincidental that His Majesty's Inspector of Prisons report came out today and said, you know, our prisons are on a knife edge. But what you've got from this is the problem, and there will be people who slip through the net. It is inevitable. But you've got a probation service that's been squeezed until their pips squeaked. You've got people who won't have homes to go to tonight because they'll be homeless. You have got all sorts of issues to deal with this. But you've also got the problem, you know, I think, personally, that Keir Starmer dealt with the rioters in Southport and other places very quickly, very swiftly, and sent a message very clearly to people. But there are people out there, I mean, you hinted at it, Nigel, in your introduction, that domestic abusers are being set free. That is actually not the case. There may be people who... I mean, and this is very, you know, it's nitpicking, but there will be nobody who is in prison serving a sentence for domestic abuse who will be released under this.
But who previously have served
for domestic abuse.
So the issue here, I think, and it'll become much more dramatic, because some of those people let out today will almost inevitably reoffend. And their future victims, whoever they may be, will wonder to themselves, why on earth were these dangerous criminals allowed to be let up early?
Well, it could be, Kwasi, because, you know, your party in government oversaw a population explosion of 6 million people and didn't build a single new prison.
Yeah, so that was. I think the Conservative Party, my party, has some responsibility for this. Because we didn't build enough prisons.
I mean, nowhere near enough.
But, as I say, this is a policy. They've come in and they've decided, they haven't said, OK, we're going to build new makeshift prisons. They haven't said that they're going to... There was a report that they were going to send them to Estonia. They haven't done that. They made a policy decision to let, 1,700 prisoners out early. And they will be responsible. If any of these prisoners...
Well, it's 5,500 by the end of October.
In 2 months.
Yeah.
And if any of those 5,000, God forbid, commits a serious crime, God forbid murder or anything like that, the government will be partially responsible for that.
Well,
and that's a very serious thing.
What it is. The previous government.
And the previous... No, they're both...
I agree with that. But what I'm saying now is that once they're in, there's a problem, and they can deal with that problem how they will. They can say, right, we can make makeshift prisons. We've had suggestions.
What about Estonia? Did that make sense to you?
The Estonian thing was never. That was a complete fiction.
Why?
It was a fiction.
But why would it not make sense? I mean, if they've got prison capacity there...
it doesn't make sense. I'm just saying it was never...
So the point I'm trying to make...
Because there is an irony about Estonia, that we could send prisoners to Estonia with a cost the taxpayer less than having been British prisoners.
So what I'm saying is that the government is making political choices every day. And they will have to be held to account.
Well, governments do that.
So you can blame...
Governments do that.
They've chosen, forgive me, to let 5,000 people out in the next 2 months.
But, Kwasi, there are people who, as yet, are not the victims of crime, who may not be the victims of crime from these people who are being released, who, when the police catch the person, the perpetrator, nothing can be done with them because there's no space in the prison.
Yeah, because it's clogged up.
I mean, there is a whole, and it's a much broader issue, and successive governments have failed to deal with.
Well, there are 10,000 foreign prisoners.
So what we would
10,000 foreign prisoners, get rid of the lot. Be loads of room then, wouldn't there?
Nigel, it doesn't take you 5 minutes, does it, to get onto this?
Why do you want... Do you want the taxpayer to pay for foreign?
Yeah, but it's really hard to get rid of them. That's the problem.
Send them to Poland or Jamaica.
You know, you've got the ECHR, you've got every court,
well, there we are then.
Lawyers. The idea that you could just press a button and ship these people away, you know, it doesn't work.
No, the ECHR would never allow it, and of course...
But our judges wouldn't allow it.
No, and all the while, the European Convention on Human Rights is enshrined in British law. We'll never be able to do these things. You asked a question earlier, where are they all going to go? The Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, said in the House of Commons today, I've authorised probation directors to make use of alternative arrangements, including budget hotels.
Yeah. Well, some will go there, but some will just disappear. I mean, some will be on the streets tonight because there is nowhere for them to go. And, of course, that in itself creates a problem because if you don't have an address, how do you then get registered with all the
ways.
other
I agree
things?
that the Conservative Party, my government, was responsible in part for this because we didn't spend enough money building prisons.
No, sure.
But there are ways you could deal with the problem as now. It wasn't inevitable that they were going to let out 5,000 people in 2 months. And that's a big risk.
Well, that's what they're doing. Now, let's talk a little bit about politics, about the TUC. Those of a certain age can remember the TUC was immensely powerful and very, very political. I've just got a sense that this TUC is now starting to flex its political muscles in a way that we haven't actually seen for decades in this country. GB News' political editor Christopher Hope was talking to the TUC General Secretary Paul Novak earlier on today.
I don't believe for one moment that most of those who voted Reform at the last election are racist. But let me say this clearly and unequivocally. Nigel Farage isn't a friend of the working class. He's a fraud. A public school educated, private equity loving, NHS privatising, Putin apologist fraud.
Now, interesting, isn't it? I mean, why should the General Secretary of the Trade Unions Congress choose to launch an attack on Reform, who may have a lot of voters but only have 5 members of Parliament? This, I think, is a sign we're going to see a very political TUC.
100%.
What say you?
So look, I met Paul Novak when I was business secretary.
Yep.
And I used to be on Zoom calls with him. I met him a couple of times. I actually went to the TUC. And at that time, because they knew there was a Conservative government, they were on their best behaviour. It was like, you know, the old days you dress up on your Sunday best. They couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been friendlier. Seeing him in that clip suggests to me that you're right. I think they're militant. I think they see that their people are in charge. They got that great pay deal within about a month or 3 weeks of Labour getting in. And this is their chance. And they're going to be a lot more political, a lot more militant. And I think they're as strong as they are since for 40 years.
I mean, are we going back to the bad old days, Jay?
Well, I don't think we are, because we haven't got that level of membership of trade unions, and we don't have the, you know, the huge factories, the car plants and things like that. I mean, there was a time back in the day when I think most people knew the names of trade union leaders.
They were huge
more
figures.
than cabinet ministers.
Yeah,
I mean, you might have known the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, but that was about it. But you knew
those people like Jim Jones and all these guys.
Exactly.
They're the household
and I
names.
think, you know, work has changed. The very nature of work has changed, and trade unions have had to change to adapt to it, because they're not getting the bulk membership that they used to from the factory gates.
But they still, I mean, let's face it, they still fund about 85% of the Labour Party's income comes from trade unions. Labour are back in power.
But not all trade unions fund the Labour Party.
But a chunk of their money.
Yes, of course it does.
But Kwasi's point is they were on best behaviour when the Conservatives...
They were on best behaviour.
Now they have real leverage.
They were never political.
They have leverage, but they also have difference. I mean, I think Paul Novak has been very interesting in talking about the winter fuel allowance that we were just talking about. He has not, or in the interviews before the conference, he didn't call on Starmer and Reeve to do a U-turn, whereas Sharon Graham from Unite did. So there is a difference, there is a nuance. I think to a certain extent the trade union movement has always been the conscience, if you like, of the Labour Party, and there is no doubt that they will be putting pressure on a Labour government to do things. But don't forget, a lot of these people are the people who were being clapped on Thursday nights during COVID because they were key workers, they were shop workers, they were nurses, they were hospital porters, they were transport workers.
So I don't have an issue with the unions in themselves, OK? But what I was interested in that speech was he had a direct problem with you, which I love.
But Nigel loves it.
Of course you do.
And
you've got big shoulders.
No.
It was a very political intervention.
That's the point. That was the point. I mean, Nigel was big enough to look after himself. And we're in politics and we expect personal hits. But what interested me was the fact that Paul Novak, who I had very, cordial professional dealings with, suddenly has become essentially a political actor. And I think that's interesting, and I think that's a hint of where they're going.
But it's the first TUC conference with a Labour government for 40 years, and it is the first TUC conference since the election.
All of that's
they're more political and they're more militant.
There is an argument that maybe we need unions more than ever. All of us benefit from the struggles and the fights that trade unions across the centuries have
So look, my issue with the trade unions is that they are highly centred around the public sector, which is natural. But, in terms of private sector, when I was a constituency MP, most of the businesses operating in my constituency were private sector enterprises. And they didn't have very strong unions, and yet they had to deal with all the economic pressures that the unions and the union bosses dealt with.
Do you know what, guys? We're going to hear a lot more about Paul Novak. Whether he becomes a household name in the old days of Len Murray's, etc., I don't know, but we're going to hear more of him. In a minute, the riots. Who was responsible for the riots? Was it me or was it Keir Starmer? You'll get an alternative view in just a moment.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. A cold spell of weather to come through the rest of this week. A particularly cold northerly wind will develop throughout the country overnight tonight, and that will bring with it some blustery showers as well. The air is coming from the Arctic, hence why it's quite so cold. We've got low pressure up to the north and east of the UK, so that's brought some very windy weather across northeastern areas of Scotland through this afternoon. That will move away to the east, though, overnight, and so it will turn a little bit calmer for these areas, but still quite a cold wind through much of the night and frequent showers across north and western areas. A bit more shelter further south and east, temperatures widely in the single figures. So it will be a chilly start to the day on Wednesday, but frost will be limited because we do still have quite a strong breeze around. And the winds will remain quite strong across northern areas of Scotland in particular. Some of these showers may start to fall as snow over parts of the Grampians as well, just over the highest mountains. That'll be the first snow we've seen in quite a few months. And some of the showers moving into northwestern areas of England, parts of Northern Ireland, could bring some hail, possibly some lightning and thunder. A drier start to the day, though, for more southern and eastern areas of the UK. But as we head towards lunchtime, cloud will develop further inland, and some of these showers could spread into parts of more southern and central areas of England, as well as eastern areas of Scotland into the afternoon. But I think the most frequent showers will continue, particularly across northwestern England, northern areas of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and it's going to feel cold as well. These are the maximum temperatures. Temperatures will feel closer to the single figures, though, with the strength of that northerly wind. Another chilly start to the day to come on Thursday. A frost potential as well, grass and air frost. And showers will be more frequent across more northern and eastern coasts as we head into Thursday afternoon. So a slightly drier day for some northwestern areas, but still some further showers to come. Looks a little bit drier and warmer by Friday, and turning a bit warmer into the weekend as well. Bye-bye.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It was on the 29th of July that horrendous murder of those 3 young girls, the injuring of 8 others and 2 adults took place in Southport. And it was the most extraordinary 24 hours afterwards of riots, of violence, and of massive online speculation as to who the perpetrator really, truly was. And it led to me saying this on a video.
To say there are 1 or 2 questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us.
Well, I felt we weren't being told the full truth. I don't know what the reasons were, and I felt even more justified in what I said just a couple of weeks later when we learnt that Callaghan, the triple murderer from Nottingham the year before, when we learnt that actually 3 years before that atrocity, a very senior doctor had said, if you let this man out, he will go out and kill. Now, quite why we weren't allowed to be told a bit more about this man, I don't know. Had we been told more about him, I do not think the Southport riots would have happened on anything like the level that they did. But this was seized upon, of course, by everybody on the left, the centre-left, mainstream media and politics to say it's Farage that's inciting the riots. And this has been said since the 3rd of August. I've never once responded to it. I've just frankly ignored it and waited for more to happen. Well, yesterday, Jonathan Hall KC, who is the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, the sort of terror czar, if you like, said, I think we are at a point in time where trust in public institutions should not be taken for granted. And when matters of high importance in the public mind happen, that, as far as is possible, for the police, the government, the media, should level with them. Those institutions will not continue to enjoy the trust that they have had to date if there is any general sense that things are being hidden, and that is exactly what the conspiracy theorists and the grievance merchants depend upon. And Lord Carlisle, also spoke out strongly on this, the former independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, and a very intelligent comment. I think we should get out more information if we possibly can. We have learned from these events that when somebody is arrested and there was a potential issue like this arising, the police probably need to tell the media who has been arrested and what their background is. Well, I've got to tell you, folks, that is exactly what I was saying. Tell us the truth, because you would not have had that frenzied online speculation. Why the government, why the police chose not to do it is something we need answers to. Perfectly clear from the views of those two gentlemen that actually it was government that led to those riots being far worse than they could have been. Now, there was some pretty appalling, abusive stuff said about me online, so I'd like apologies, please, from Anna Soubry, Brendan Cox, Dawn Butler MP, David Baines MP, Kim Johnson MP, Stand Up to Racism, Andy MacDonald MP, the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, Jess Phillips, former SNP leader Humza Yousaf, former Tory MP Tobias Elwood, the Metro Mayor of Liverpool Steve Rotherham, the Times newspaper, LBC's James O'Brien, Trevor Phillips, Tom Tugendhat, and the former Assistant Commissioner of the Police, Neil Basu. Oh, and Ian Hislop as well. Well, there we are. I might get an apology from all of them, but I rather doubt that I will. But, Joe, and I know, you were fairly critical of me at the time as well, actually what's been said there is right and very interesting.
What's been said is right and very interesting. I was critical of you because you went on Twitter instead of using your position in the House of Commons. And
the House wasn't sitting, to be fair.
Yes, it was.
Well, for a day and then...
But it was the wrong place to do it. Well, let me just finish, because I think it ill-behoves a man of Nigel's intelligence and ability to play the Sid James of nudge, nudge, wink, wink when it comes to conspiracy theories.
No. I was asking to dampen down the conspiracy theories.
You should have asked the Home Secretary in Parliament. Anyway, you didn't...
I didn't get the opportunity to, because all that happened... Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well, we've had
the broader point...
But the broader point is absolutely, yes,
right.
It is much better that people are told the truth. And, in fact, we've heard that today in the Lucy Letby inquiry, the Thirlwell inquiry, interestingly, that the parents of those children who died or who were injured were not told about the concerns that had been raised. Now, this happens all the time in the health service.
So, look, I think...
And the thing that you mentioned about...
So why did Starmer and others decide to keep stum? They must have known, as we all knew, that some crazy stuff was happening online.
So, look, to be fair, to try and be fair to them, the world has changed. In the last 5-10 years, social media, Twitter...
Yes.
20 years ago, you could keep things quiet.
You can't now.
And you had a different relationship with the media and the police.
That's right. And so in government, I don't think government's caught up. I think they think, we've got to keep it quiet. There's an ongoing inquiry. And I'm afraid with social media... things are going to go crazy.
Well, exactly.
And so you need more transparency and you need more openness.
Well, as I say...
And that's what caught them out.
But it's also the police. I mean, I dispute the fact that unless you've got any evidence that it was a government decision. No, sometimes the police are absolutely not very sensible about dealing with things and not very quick, but they are dealing with an ongoing issue.
I think you're right. I think it's an operational...
Leading politicians...
Nigel, I really don't think you should blame the government.
They should have known that a cauldron was building up out there of false speculation.
Yes, but you were part of it.
That is absolute rot. I was not part of it in any way at all. I was saying, for goodness sake, tell us the truth.
Yes,
Had they told us the truth, those riots would not have happened on that scale.
But you had the opportunity to ask the Home Secretary either in writing or in the comments.
You could have written.
By the way, number one,
you could have written it, and you could have done it properly.
And number two, I got a much bigger, more immediate audience on X than I ever would have got.
But that's the problem.
Yeah,
but that's the problem.
But that's the problem.
Which sums up why.
Why are you in Parliament? Why are you in Parliament?
No,
why don't you just tweet on X?
Well, because I have to represent people in Parliament, and that's why they want to be represented. But the truth of it is, and you've just summed it up, X is now so big, government and police need to recognise that.
Yeah, and they need to catch up. I mean, look, I would give the government the benefit of the doubt, because having been a government minister, there's a whole bunch of stuff operationally that's happening. There's no way that the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister knows about what the operational elements, the detail is
and they wouldn't have
on the ground.
there was
and they wouldn't know about that. And it's to do with the people on the ground.
Very simple question. Well, I tell you what, if anything as beastly as this happens again, let's hope some very significant
But then I would like you, Nigel, to say, stop speculating to the people who are not.
Well, what I was saying was, tell us the truth and the speculation will end. I was absolutely... Do you know what? I was the only MP that got this right, and I really believe that. I genuinely
What
believe
did the
that.
other MPs say? I mean, they said that you were,
Oh, yes. They were perfectly happy with the silence, whilst out there was a ferment growing in the country, and they got it wrong. In a minute, there'll be a really big debate going on tonight. Yep, Trump v Harris. What does it mean? How significant is it? Who's going to win? Oh, nearly forgot, there's also a race to be the next Conservative Party leader.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
I've got a question for you here, Mr. Motivator. Each time I will try and do a couch to 5K, and I start and then it stops, and then I'll have another go. It's baby steps, though, for most of us, isn't it? You've got to start slow, because I also see people go out and run, do that, and then do too much, and they get completely exhausted and think, I can't do this anymore. So what is it? You have to start slowly, right? Is that fair?
Well, with everything that you do need to start slowly. But what's more important than that? You need to identify an activity that suits you. Now, the thing is, you may want to do couch to 5K, but let's say you have a preponderance for swimming. Maybe swimming is what you really like, or dancing is what you like. You find the activity that suits you. And I have to say, you'll never see a happy jogger. They're happy afterwards. They have enjoyed the experience, but they're never happy whilst doing it. But you must start with everything.
Have you ever been out of shape, though? Because whilst I find you really inspiring, I feel as though you've always been in good nick, and therefore it's kind of come easy to you. Whereas I think, there are plenty of people who have a tendency to put on weight. I mean, I can look at chocolate and I feel like I put on weight. And it's a slog, especially if you've taken your foot off the gas for a while. Getting back into it's brutal. What do you know about that?
Well, let me just say this to you, that in the early days, and I can go back, don't forget, 71 years, our activity level was much higher. But this is something that's really just happened in the last 30 years. So those 30 years, we have changed. We now spend more time in front of the computer. We spend more time sitting down. So that's why we need gyms, and we need to get up. Now, gyms don't suit everybody. And that's why I do free classes. Free club, you can join. Everyone can get access to movement in their home. But you have got to make that first step.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions.
That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return.
And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I doubt there's been a presidential debate of such significance in America for many, many decades. Donald Trump, of course, everyone knows who he is, but Kamala Harris, well, she may have been the vice president for the last 4 years, but not really very widely known. How much does it matter? What are the polls telling us? I'm joined by Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics, who joins me live from Chicago. Tom, welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the programme. How much, in your view, and in the view of the polls, how much does this debate tonight actually matter?
Well, you know, the old saw is that presidential debates don't really matter until they do. And we saw that on June 27th when Joe Biden's performance, it mattered a lot. It drove him out of the race. And so the question is this another debate that's going to matter a lot? Or will it maybe not matter very much at all? I mean, the polls tell us this is a very, very close race. Kamala Harris is up 1.1% nationally in our Real Clear Politics average. That's down from about 1.9% just a week or 10 days ago. So some of that bump from the convention and from her taking over has sort of worn off. And in the battleground states where this race is going to be decided, it's very, very close. Harris has about a 1.5 lead in Wisconsin, a 1 point lead in Michigan. Pennsylvania's tied, and everything else is a half a point or less. And so even if this debate shifts opinion only by, you know, a 1% or 0.5%, it could make a difference in some of these key battleground states.
Yeah, it could. Am I right to think that the American public don't really know Harris very well?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, she has been vice president for 4 years. You know, obviously she was in the Senate before that. But in terms of, you know, her operating as her own candidate, as the person who, you know, would be the commander in chief, would be the leader of the free world, she hasn't really put out a whole lot of explanations or policy positions over the course of the last 50 days or so that she's been the effective Democratic nominee. And so I think there are a lot of questions. There are some undecided voters who are they're going to watch this debate very carefully. They're waiting to hear more from her because she simply hasn't, you know, given herself, given explanations to the public via interviews or press conferences. She hasn't done any of that. And so this might be one of their first and perhaps only chances to see her live, and she's going to have to defend her policies. She's going to have to explain her position. She's going to have to be quick on her feet, and they're looking to see how she's going to do.
Fascinating. Tom Bevan, thank you for joining us. Well, Tom there, I mean, wow, this is so tight, isn't it? A country of 300 million people, and it'll be 10,000 voters here and 5,000 voters there that decide it. Kwasi, isn't it amazing that you can be a senior figure who could be president in a couple of months' time and no one knows what you stand for?
Yeah, it's incredible. But if you look at the circumstances in which she became the nominee, they were pretty incredible too. I mean, Joe Biden had been there. I mean, he'd been in the Senate, what, for 40, 35 years, 36 years, been in politics for 50 years. So people knew who he was. She's much younger, a lot less experienced. And what I find extraordinary is that she was nominated, or essentially she took over in a kind of bait and switch, only 6 weeks ago. So. And in all that time, she's only had one interview, and that was with her vice presidential candidate, you know, as a kind of chaperone. Tim Walz on her side. So she's never actually, on her own account,
but tonight,
having had to defend herself.
But
and
tonight,
she will. That's what's significant about tonight.
Any thoughts what happens tonight,
Well,
John?
I think she's got more to lose than Trump. I mean, we all know what Trump is, and we all know how he will perform, and he will come out with, you know, word salad as usual, but those people who love him will love him anyway. I think it's a question of whether she can... What he hates, like all narcissists, is to be prodded and goaded. And if she can do that and create a reaction, provoke a reaction from him, then she's probably won. I mean, I think, you know, although she is not flagging it up hugely, she doesn't need to, because self-evidently she is a woman, she is doing quite well, as far as I understand, amongst women voters. And we've also seen this week that Dick Cheney is going to vote for her.
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the shop, isn't it? You've got a Kennedy backing Trump.
Yeah.
You've got... I mean, let's see.
So I think
it's going to be interesting.
I think Trump, people know. I mean, you'll have to have lived under a rock not to know who Trump is. I think with Kamala Harris, the polls, as Tom suggested, are sliding a little bit. I mean, it's slightly narrower. There was a time when she was running away with it.
But it'll be a good watch.
I think it will be.
You know what? Talking of that, as Donald Trump Thank you for the cue. And Kamala Harris go head-to-head in their first presidential debate. It's going to be live on GB News overnight. Tom Harwood presents America Decides, Trump v Harris. It'll be on live on GB News from 2 a.m, both on radio and on television. So there we are. Just a quick one to finish. The Tory leadership race has not especially inspired the nation as yet. Today, a fella called Mel Stride has been kicked out. Kwasi, tell us why we should be really excited about this.
I think the public is right. It's not the most exciting time. I mean, when you've got 5 candidates and they've been eliminated to 4, I think the public, quite rightly, isn't particularly as focused as it might be on it. I think it'll become much more interesting when we get to the last 2. It's unclear to me who the last 2 will be. I suspect Jenrick will be one of them. So do I. But I don't know who the other person is. It seems like a wide open race.
No, Joe, you've been in and around politics and media all your life. You must be gripped by this.
Do you know, I'm so gripped. I can hardly even think about the American election. You'd have to run through the names again, Nigel. I think, you know, whoever wins, they're not probably most likely going to be the next Tory
Well, they said that about Starmer. They said exactly the same thing about Starmer.
Yes, I know, but then your party imploded, so you slightly gave it to him on a plate, didn't you? But actually, you know, it's probably going to be the caretaker person who works out where the Tory party goes, and then it's the person after that, which will be much more interesting by the time we get into mid-term of a Keir Starmer government.
I suspect that is right. I'm joined by Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. You are gripped by this election.
Of course, I'm listening to every heartbeat of it. And I think tonight's result was probably quite good for Kemi. She gained the most votes. Mel's marginal, but these are in margins, these things. And James Cleverly stalled, didn't go up. There are 16 votes from Mel Stride, which you would assume are primarily up for the left-wing candidate. So that's James and Tom Tugendhat. Yep. So you'd expect them to go up. And so there are at least 3 people who could get it at the moment. Yes, and I don't know which the 4th will be who will be eliminated next time.
And in brief tonight, your big subject?
Tonight, well, I'm going to be talking about Germany suddenly modelling itself on you. I know. So, the Chancellor of Germany should be called Herr Farage, I think, from now on, because he wants to close the borders.
I know, they're much too right-wing for me, these German politicians, but isn't it amazing? And what they're saying is that the ECHR can go to hell.
Oh, they don't care about that, and they don't care about free movement. They've got a special exemption, because, of course, they're Germany to close their borders.
And they wrote the rules in the first place for the whole club. It's quite extraordinary. I am done for the evening. Back with you tomorrow. Let's get the news. Weather first, though, with Annie Shuttleworth.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. A cold spell of weather to come through the rest of this week. A particularly cold northerly wind will develop throughout the country overnight tonight, and that will bring with it some blustery showers as well. The air is coming from the Arctic, hence why it's quite so cold. We've got low pressure up to the north and east of the UK, so that's brought some very windy weather across northeastern areas of Scotland through this afternoon. That will move away to the east, though, overnight, and so it will turn a little bit calmer for these areas, but still quite a